What's a serious event in the world that few people know about? It was on this documentary I saw the shady world of fast fashion on YouTube. All these mountains of used and unsold clothes from the first world are sold to Western Africa. It's a huge business there. They are then sold to vendors who resell them. The leftover clothes are sent to a dump near the ocean, and the pile of them is unbelievable. It stretches for miles. The environmental problems the textile industry causes at all levels, from pesticides to water use and chemicals in dyes to transport of clothes, is one of the #1 pollution sources on the globe. People in southern Madagascar have been facing a severe drought for the last 2 years. More than 1 million left starving. To give more info, we are your typical predatory government state, high corruption, not a lot of development projects, etc. I am not a huge fan myself of donating money to NGOs, as it is often a band-aid solution that isn't sustainable and exacerbates corruptions in countries like mine source. My international development BA and personal experience. The situation. Madagascar is bigger than France in terms of surface, which is a fact that not a lot of people realize. We are a biodiversity hotspot, as diverse as Costa Rica, and the south is our very own desert. It's hard to access, as road infrastructures are poor, and it's a very dry area. We are on the brink of the first climate change-induced famine, and there is in general no infrastructures such as schools and healthcare, etc. There's a current civil war in Ethiopia that has left approximately 600,000 dead since beginning in 2018. It is a vicious war where both sides have been accused of forcing civilians to fight with very little training. That sand is the most stolen and unregulated resource in the world. It's the raw material for concrete or cement. I always confuse the two, and it's specifically water sand that's needed because its irregular shape serves as a better binding agent. We can't start using sand from the Sahara, because it's round and can't bind. China has used a huge percentage of world's sand in the last couple of decades. Almost every river that is being used for irrigation the world over is running deficits. Almost all of them to varying degree of deficit. Some of them are being mentioned here, like the Sidaria, which leads to the Aral Sea. But the Colorado in America is responsible for about 10% of the entire world's GDP. It used to flow into Mexico, and now it's starting to come up short in Nevada. Much more geopolitically important rivers like the Nile and Indus are hitting much of the same deficits. As climate is changing, this is going to lead to literally billions of people being food insecure as the former floodplain in which fed their farms disappears. Grapes, for example, come primarily from California and Peru. They are a very water-intense crop. They will quite soon cost so much to produce that they will no longer be marketable. Foods like bananas or coconuts will be more affordable and take up their space in supermarkets. We need to remember the political upheaval of the Arab Spring that got started from an East Mediterranean drought. The plague and the lockdowns caused supply shocks we all still suffering from. Demand for food will be constant, however supply of the capital needed, that is farmland, as well as supply of labor, that is farmers, is going to disappear in the next few decades. If nations don't start transitioning to green housing and net zero irrigation, then there will be a constant conflict, as we have seen the last few years almost everywhere. The oldest known plague graves from the Black Death 1338-1352-ish are in Kyrgyzstan. It is believed Yersinia pestis made the jump from animals to people there, then spread across to Europe. It came back about every 50 years and is still around today. The Great Salt Lake in Utah is nearly dried up. Estimates are that it has 5 more years, tops. There is a civil war in Myanmar, formerly Burma, between a junta coup and the people who are anti-junta. The junta are responsible for the coup that saw the deposition of a popular democratically elected politician. It is insane what has happened is going on there. The whole military junta in control for decades, followed by voluntary democratic reform with the cooperation of a woman who was jailed for 15 years and is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, only to be followed by the most recent coup. I remember watching that fitness instructor video on YouTube where the military vehicles rolled down the street in the background when the coup started. But the real tragedy is the campaign of ethnic cleansing genocide being carried out on the Rohingya people, a Muslim minority ethnic group. Even the now deposed Nobel Peace Prize winner has now been accused of ignoring being complicit with the genocide. Chiang Kai-shek intentionally broke the flood walls of the Yellow River during the Japanese invasion of China in WWII. The Japanese were invading from the north and circling in on Wuhan, the capital at the time. Shek was advised that breaching the river should flood the invaders. This was an incorrect assumption. The Yellow River in China has a long history of changing courses, and they failed to predict that course correctly. It instead flooded mostly to the south, flooding and killing millions, destroying homes and cities. Also, the Yellow River is very silty from the dirt in the mountains, and covered over a third of all the farmland in China, a thick layer of clay, destroying the farmland for decades. This led to mass deaths and general lawlessness in the chunk that was flooded. Oh, and the floods didn't even really bother the Japanese. They retreated for a little bit, took another path to Wuhan and captured it few months later anyway. So Shek just murdered millions of his own people in possible the worst no backfire in human history. The Mount Toba eruption that decimated the human population around 70,000 years ago. It could have been the end for us. It's estimated that less than 1,000 people existed on the southern tip of South Africa for 1,000 to 3,000 years. I've read research that estimated less than 250 people at its lowest point. Almost all people can trace their lineage to those people. It is also speculation that fingertips wrinkle in water comes from that period, since most of their food consisted of seafood like snails, crabs, etc. Those who were able to get most food were also more able to reproduce. This is one of the reasons that I don't think humans will go extinct. We are like a virus. You can only kill 99.99% of us. Some will survive and develop new traits who makes us harder to kill. Democratic Republic of Congo is sitting on trillions worth of natural resources, including cobalt, and they are being deliberately destabilized by foreign nations and international corporations to prevent the locals gaining control over their own resources. This August, a vaccine for cancer will begin human trials in the UK using the mRNA innovations from the COVID-19 vaccine. It should be able to directly target cancer cells and only cancer cells much superior to chemotherapy. A vaccine for Lyme disease has been completed using the same technology, and a vaccine for malaria has been developed using the same technology. Two Mark 39 hydrogen bombs were accidentally dropped over Goldsboro, North Carolina on the 23rd of January 1961. Thankfully, they never detonated. Long-haul trucking in the US is dying. No one wants to do it because it pays poorly. And no one wants to get into it because the pay is really bad, and depending which company you try to go through, the benefits are also awful. I knew two guys that tried to become truckers. One gave up because he said 50% of truckers are drunk or on drugs, and he didn't want to be involved when it comes out. The other got a job that paid way more just driving a box truck around the city. It's definitely going to be a problem when the current truckers are too old to keep going. Everything is going to get expensive, and everyone will be super confused about why the poor got poorer. Bhopal disaster. A preventable gas leak killed thousands of people almost instantly and injured over 500,000 people. The deaths and injuries could have been avoided, but they turned off the emergency sirens. And of course the victims barely got any reparations or justice. What King Leopold did to the DR of Congo, created it through abuse and manipulation. Africans were used as slaves, hands and heads cut off, babies thrown on the ground, getting illiterate African chiefs to sign contracts giving the land to the king, using starvation and beatings. There's tons more. Read King Leopold's Ghost Chilling, and I think should be taught around the world, as it shows both how the king manipulated and bought his way to having the world recognize the state country he reported, and the absolute brutality the Belgian king unleashed on the population for pure greed and power. The 26th of September 1983, when a Soviet officer, Stanislav Petrov, literally saved the whole planet from nuclear war by identifying a nuclear missile attack alarm as false. Everyone owes him their lives today. Tunguska blast. Meteor blew up a few hundred meters above the forest in Siberia, flattened hundreds of acres of trees, only 2 or 3 minutes earlier, and it would have airburst over any number of European capital cities. A lot of people in the West seem to be unaware that the Nazis didn't only target Jews, but they also planned complete extermination of Slavic people and killed about 30 million Slavic civilians because of their race. Majority of Soviet Union's WWII casualties were civilians. Thousands of villages in Belarus, Ukraine and Russia had their entire population burned alive by the Germans. Millions of people were intentionally starved to death, for example during blockade of Leningrad. My grandfather grew up in Salvo, NCOBX. He was a child during WWII. His stories are so wild. When driving at night they had to tape up their headlights, only allowing a quarter-sized hole for the light to come through. They didn't want the German subs off the coast know where people resided. All windows facing the water had to have blackout curtains nailed to them for the same reason. Coast Guard troops on horseback came by often to visit his sisters. Explosions that rattled windows from subs and ships blowing each other up were a common occurrence. He said he remembers the water being on fire from destroyed fuel ships. He also found all kinds of things wash up on the beach. Everything from a 10-pound wax-covered bar of German chocolate to dead German soldiers. When he took the chocolate home, his parents told him to throw it away because they feared it was poisoned. So he hid it in the beach grass in the sand dunes. And he'll tell you that chocolate wasn't poisoned.